Kia ora tātou. It is such a huge pleasure to be here. There were a couple of times in my time with World Vision when I was with Seth. One was in northern India, and another time was in a part of Africa when I thought I was likely to be far closer to Jesus than I planned to be. The kind of trouble that Seth and I got ourselves into as we traveled the world has been amazing. Thank you, Seth. That's a lovely, lovely introduction. It is a real treat to be here. As I was listening to the worship, the sense I got was it was a feeling of coming home. And look, I'm an Anglican. I'm not a Salvationist. But it just felt like being among people who love Jesus, who want to change this world, and are doing it the hard way. Not sitting as commentators out of the ring, but in the very ring of life, in the messiness and the hardness and the challenges, taking the blows, taking the knocks, and standing up and coming back day after day after day. And of course, that was the Jesus way. Jesus moved into the neighborhood, and that's what you're doing. So thank you so much for the chance to talk really as friends, more than as a speaker talking at a conference. Now, Hannah is somewhere floating around, and she's going to work the PowerPoint, and somehow or other I'm going to indicate to her when we're going to change the slides. But we're going to start actually as an 8-year-old. When I was at Kendall School, and hopefully somewhere around us, there we go, Kendall School. I was walking home from school one day, and I just passed the Kendall School fish and chip shop when God spoke to me. Now, as an 8-year-old, I wasn't particularly surprised that God spoke to me. I guess as a 53-year-old, I have a slightly different view that it's a more uncommon occurrence than I thought. But as an 8-year-old, God spoke to me, and he said this: I am going to use you to help change my world. I'm going to use you to help change my world. And I remember going home, somewhat matter-of-factly, pointing this out to Mum. God just spoke to me on the way home, just past the fish and chip shop, Kendall School, and told me that he's going to use me to help change the world. And Mum's reaction was magnificent. She turned around and said, well, look, that's lovely, dear. Perhaps you could start by tidying your bedroom. And there's more wisdom in that comment than I think I was willing to appreciate as an 8-year-old. But setting out with that mission, with the desire to change the world, I didn't have a clue how to change the world. But I did think, as Seth said, it might start with Treasury. Because Treasury at that stage, I thought, was changing the world in all the wrong ways. So we'll go and change Treasury. And I remember vividly my first Treasury report, because I learnt my first lesson of how hard it is to change this world. It was a report on housing. Even in 1986, housing was an issue. And in this report, I wrote about justice. I wrote about equity. I wrote about poverty. And I wrote about opportunity. Wrote this report, sent it in, and a few days later, my new manager called me in. Now imagine, first couple of weeks in the job, you're trying to impress. And there's my report sitting on his desk. And he circled all these various words with red ink. Poverty, justice, opportunity. And he said, Chris, we don't use those words around here. We talk about low income, and we talk about choice. And to my perpetual shame, the young man who'd gone to Treasury to change the world changed his language. So in future, all my reports were about low income and about choice. And we know the power of words. We know that words change the world. We know that is how God created this world. He spoke, and it was created. So I was to learn very quickly that if we want to change the world, it actually means being willing to be courageous, to stand apart, and yet intimately involved in this world. So I had my opportunity to change the world a year later, well, about 3 or 4 years later, in fact, when I went to work for the then Minister of Health. So we'll go to the next slide. And I thought we'd done some truly world-changing work. Because what we did is we wrote legislation that stopped the promotion of tobacco. And in doing that, we saved about 4,500 lives a year. And for me as a young man, I thought that's a pretty good contribution to New Zealand society. So roll the clock forward 15 years, and I'm with Seth in Malawi, in Africa. And we're going to this village to open a well that had been funded by New Zealanders. As we got closer and closer and closer to this village, we came across the first tobacco crops. Mile upon mile upon mile upon mile of tobacco. And I suddenly realized that when we did the legislation in New Zealand to change tobacco advertising, all we worried about were the farmers in Motueka. And actually we made them instant millionaires because we encouraged them to grow grapes. But the point was, we never thought that in actually changing the world down here, we might have a ripple effect all the way across the other side of the world. That there were communities, poor communities, surviving only because they grew tobacco. It's a very hard thing to try and change the world. And I think all of us confronted with the challenges of how do we change this world? We do one of two things. We lose our initial aspiration, write it down as youthful naivety, and just end up being like the rest of the world, or we adopt a particular approach. And there are 4 approaches that I've seen to how we go about changing the world, which I want to spend just a few minutes outlining to you. I think you might recognize them. We're going to go forward a couple of slides. The first way that we seek to change the world is by building a parallel universe. In other words, what we think, the way to change the world is to create our own world that will coexist with the existing world. So we build Christian hospitals. We establish Christian political parties. We build Christian schools. And I in no way want to disparage that as a way of having an impact on this world. But the difficulty with that approach is that it runs parallel to the rest of the world. And if we're not very, very careful, what happens is we end up staking out our territory on areas that the rest of the world does not find relevant. I think that is why so many Christian communities have become obsessed about the politics of the bedroom and not the politics of the fact that their children today are growing up surrounded by perpetual violence. So growing a parallel universe, I don't believe, is the way the Lord calls us to change this world. The second way we do it is, in fact, to do seemingly the opposite, and this is equally seductive. What we do is we seek to be relevant. And so Hannah's going to pull up the slide. And this relevance is all about, see, we can have just as much fun as the rest of the world. Look, we love the same music, we love going to the same sports teams, we're just as cool as you are. And many churches, many communities have gone down this path. We lose our essence, we lose our salt, we lose our distinctiveness. The third approach is to do as Gloria Vale has done. And as you'll see in the next slide, what do? They take themselves completely away from the world and don't interact with the world at all. 3 highly seductive ways of changing this world. 3 ways which I believe actually are deeply flawed. The first, because we create a parallel universe separate from the world. The second, because we end up just being like the world. And the third, we extract ourselves completely from the world. So is there another way? Is there another way that we can change this world? Well, of course there is. There is the Jesus way. And how did God set about changing his world? He moved into the neighborhood. He was faithfully present and remains faithfully present through you in this world today. It's called incarnational living. I'm absolutely convinced from all my experience here in New Zealand and working internationally, that is the only way that the world has changed. Let's go to the next slide. Some of you may recognize this particular character, Blair McKenzie from Queenstown, the community manager. I'm not sure if Blair is still down there as the community manager, but this is what's called a faithful presence. This is where we live in the neighborhood. And it's challenging living in the neighborhood. Why? Because if we choose to live in the neighborhood, we have to involve ourselves in the messiness and the brokenness of life. That's a hard place to be. It's so much easier to live in a parallel universe offering out advice than to be fully in the pit of life. That is the way that as an army here in New Zealand and around the world, you have chosen to live. That is your birthright. It is also the birthright of World Vision. For 65 years, we have been seeking to change the world, to bring life in all its fullness to children all around the world. And how do we do that? We do that by living in the community. This next slide is quite dense, but it gives you a sense of the journey. It's a similar journey to the one that you're on. In other words, we move into the community. We live with the community. We become part of that community. And before we do anything, we learn about that community. We come not as advisors, not as experts, but as servants, seeking to live the life of Christ in that community. And we start with an incredibly important proposition. Not what is wrong with this community, but what is right with this community. That is a theological statement because it says God is already at work in this community. And what are we doing? We're joining the Lord. We're invited by the Lord to join that great work in His community. And so, of course, there'll be moments of beauty amidst the brokenness. So let's find the beauty and work with that beauty. It might be a woman who goes out to raise money for her children every day, saves that money, not even sharing it with her husband, and from that money, it means that she can actually give her children education. Whatever it is, that's where we start, and that's your journey. Not what's wrong with this community, but what is right with this community. What is the Lord doing with this community, and then how can we partner with that community and move forward? That is the journey of incarnation. That is the way the Lord works when He seeks to change this world, and that's what we're invited to do. But imagine you're doing it in the middle of a war zone. That's really when it gets hard. I want to tell you the story of Sarajevo, 1992 to 1996, a beautiful, beautiful city which knew the joy of liberation when it became its own nation as part of Bosnia. And then just within a few weeks after that, what happened was that the snipers arrived on the hills all around the city and continued to snipe away and mortar attack the city for 4 years. They besieged it. You couldn't get out. You couldn't get in. It was the longest siege of modern warfare. Many thousands of people were killed. Every day, the constant symphony was mortar attacks and sniper fire. If you're a mother going out to collect water, you were not sure you'd get home alive. If you're a father going out to collect firewood, you knew the chances of getting home were at best 50-50. Thousands of people killed, many buildings destroyed. A man called Vedran Smilovic was a cellist. He was the principal cellist in the local orchestra. He had given up playing the cello because there's not much call for symphony orchestras in the middle of a war zone. And he was sitting in his apartment looking out a window one day, and he watched a group of women going to collect bread. And what was noteworthy about it was so hard to actually find bread in this community. But there's a local baker that kept on baking. And he watched these 22 women gather outside the bakery to buy bread, just absent-mindedly. Then suddenly he heard a mortar coming low over his building, and it landed on the woman, killing 22 of them. He was devastated. He went downstairs, rushed out to see what help he could do, and he spent the rest of the afternoon trying to help the survivors, of whom there were very, very few. He comes back from that experience, back to his room, absolutely brokenhearted, and he writes it in his journal, I'm not a politician. I'm powerless. I'm not a soldier. I can't fight. What can I do? And in deep despair, he goes to bed. The next morning, he wakes up and he has an idea. He goes into his wardrobe, pulls out his dinner suit, white shirt, bow tie, puts it on, dusty as it was. He goes to reach for his long, non-played cello, picks up the cello case and the little stool that he used to carry, and he marched downstairs. He knew it would be the last thing that he ever did. But he knew that if he was taken out by a sniper holding his cello, that there would be some beauty in that moment. He walked across the street, fully expecting to be sniped, and walked into the middle of where the mortar had been, set up his stool, pulled out his cello, and started playing. He thought the last piece of music he would ever play. And as he played his cello, an amazing thing happened. The sniper fire stopped. There's complete silence through the valley of Sarajevo as this beautiful music, the music of hope, started to play out of this mortared area. And then slowly, as he continued to play, more and more and more people emerged from their houses, fully knowing that they were in the sights of a sniper, fully knowing this would probably be the last thing they would ever do, knowing that they'd probably die listening to music. He completed the music and went home, much to his incredulity. He did it the second day. He did it the third day. He did it the fourth day. He did it 22 days in a row, every day commemorating one of those women who'd been killed by those mortars. He did it in cemeteries. He did it at funerals, a favorite spot for the snipers to attack. He survived. And as he continued to play, more and more and more people started to come out and listen to this cellist who was doing this ridiculously foolish thing, bringing hope to this community while fully in the sights of the sniper. That is called faithful presence. That is called incarnation. That is called being Christ in our communities. That is not accepting that brokenness needs to be the definition of our neighborhoods. It is accepting that brokenness is a reality. It's accepting that there is a more to shout. But it's also saying that we bring a melody of hope. And as foolish and as stupid and as silly as it is, and as risky as it is, that's what we do. When we choose to say, we will bring life as an army to this world, to our neighborhood. We will seek to be like Christ. Now, the story of Vedron speaks to me deeply. It speaks to me as an 8-year-old boy, so wanting to change this world, because God had said to me, as I walk past the fish and chip shop, I'm going to use you to help change my world. It speaks to me as a treasury officer when I blinked, when I shouldn't have blinked. It speaks to me as a young official working in the Ministry of Health's office, putting through policy, not fully realizing the implications that it would have on the other parts of the world. Of course, what we bring to this world will be inadequate. Of course, it will only ever be a partial melody. But it is the Lord's melody. So as I speak to you this morning, I want to leave you with 4 very simple thoughts. The first is this: we are so much more powerful than ever we realize. Something happened when Vedron played that music. The sniper who had his sights on his heart did not pull the trigger. Why? We will not fully ever know. Should he have? Given that what the snipers were trying to do was to break the spirit of the people of Sarajevo? Absolutely. But he heard a melody that he hadn't heard for a very long time. We are so much more powerful than we realize, and playing small does no service to our Lord. Nelson Mandela, when he was released from prison, quoted Marianne Williamson, has this amazing piece of music, who says, our greatest challenge is not that we are small, but that we are powerful even beyond measure. And playing small does not honor God. That instead, we should bring the joy and delight of childhood to everything that we do. We're immensely more powerful than we realize. I notice this a lot because for organizations which are faith-based, it seems to me that we so often apologize for our faith or minimize our faith or excuse it as a slightly awkward part of our mission statement. Actually, that is playing small. That does not bring delight to the Lord. And that's why I'd love your new mission statement about being light and life to this community and living like Jesus in this community. That is your strength. Why? Because we're joining the Lord in His work. It is not our work. And that is why the music can play out, even in the midst of a mortar attack. Secondly, we must know our melody. Vedron was a cellist. He knew his music passionately. He may not have played the cello in public for quite a while since the attack started, but he knew his music well. And that professionalism and that sense of melody rang out across that valley. For us as people of Christ and followers of Christ, we must know our melody deeply and intimately. It must move beyond being an awkward explanation of why we do what we do to become the very reason that we bring hope to this world. And what is our melody? Our melody is simply this: that we're seeking to be like Jesus, living in this neighborhood, that we live on the other side of the cross, where death is not the outcome that should be expected, where brokenness is not the final story, where violence and divorce and dismemberment is not the final story. Rather, our story is one of love. Our story is one of faith. And above all, our story is one of hope. That in the midst of brokenness, this profound, beautiful melody will ring true. Thirdly, we must bring our best game. We must bring our best music to the community. Vedran was no ordinary cellist. He was the very best cellist in the community of Sarajevo. What we do in our communities is never an act of charity. It is deeply and profoundly an act of justice. And therefore, because it's an act of justice, we must bring our very best to that work. Why? Because we fail the poor, we fail the dispossessed, we fail those who live on the margins of society unless we bring our very best. So there is no excuse for second best when we're talking about making a difference in this world. So we must know the melody, and we must bring the very best of our performance to that melody. What also speaks to me about the passage of Vedran was how crazy and foolish and stupid his act of hope was. He should not have survived that day. And yet he did. And he did it through playing a cello. How often have you been told, it's foolish what you're trying to do? It'll never work. We haven't got the funds. It was tried before and it failed. Do something kind of more achievable. Isn't that the message we so often hear? And yet, isn't it interesting? It's fools who change this world. It's fools who change this world. It's fools who accept that the mission they've been called on is not one of their own making. It's a mission the Lord has called them to. Think about the fools that we know so well in Scripture. Think about Noah. Who builds a boat, a massive boat, miles from the shore, knowing that global warming is going to bring water lapping alongside those edge of that boat within just a few years? Complete and absolute madness. Who packs up everything he has and follows a dream the Lord has given him because he promises that out of this old man and this old woman, he will found a nation? Who is stupid enough, having seen his son basically wish that he was dead, force the sale of the family farm, take the proceeds of the farm, race from home, basically cursing his father? And the father is foolish enough to every day go to the edge of the town to scan the horizon in the belief that one day he might see the familiar form of his son. And who is foolish enough to send his son to this world to die for us when his son is God himself? Scripture is full of fools. That is the journey that we're called to live if we're going to seek to change this world. It's a lonely journey. We'll be laughed at. If you say that it is possible to end poverty in New Zealand, you'll be laughed at. If you say that justice will one day prevail, people will think you're naive. And if you start challenging the comfort of their lives, not only will you be laughed at and called naive, you'll be seen as dangerous and subversive. And you know that well, because so many of your excellent advocacy work has been challenging the way that so many of us with power choose to live. So, the message of Vedran is really a reflection of a much deeper message, which is the message of the Lord, which says it doesn't have to be this way, that there is another message, and it's a message of hope. And what are we called to do? We're called not to play small, but to play big, and in that bring delight and music and joy to the Lord. Secondly, to deeply know our melody. And that lies at the heart of new strategy, which is seeking to be like Jesus, seeking to be light in this world. Thirdly, to bring the very best that we can to that melody, not to bring second best. And fourthly, to accept that actually in doing this, that we will be seen as fools, as naive, and at times even as subversive. The question I want to leave you with is this picture image on the screen. Vedron said, I'm not a soldier. I cannot fight. I'm not a politician. I cannot bring power to the conversation. All I have is my cello. That is all I can bring. Each one of us has a cello. I don't know what that cello is. For some of you, it will be literally a cello or a violin or the musicians that we heard so splendidly earlier on this morning. For others, it will be your voice. For others, it will be your hands. Whatever it is, that is what the Lord has gifted you with to bring to His community. So never see it as too small or too inconsequential or too naive to be used by the Lord. So the question I leave you with today is, what is your cello? What is that one thing that you can bring to your community right now? What is that one thing that can be Jesus in your community? And then as an army, you have this wonderful, wonderful mandate because you say, we don't do it alone. We do it standing together. And suddenly the solo cello becomes, as you can see, multitudes of cellos. The music is amplified. The richness comes out. And there's a lovely harmony that comes with playing together. At the heart of your strategy is a deep belief that you must play together better. That is the challenge that faces every orchestra, and I believe faces all of us as we seek to follow Christ. But so much better that we don't play solo cello and instead choose to play together. And in choosing to play together, we will start to realize some of the ambitions that we've been singing about this morning, that we might transform not just the neighborhood, but also the nation. So please join with me as we finish this part of this conference this morning by remembering that we're all called to change this world. That's what it means to be a follower of Christ. Secondly, that we're called to do it in the hardest way possible, by living in the neighborhood, which means we have to confront all the brokenness in the world that we see in our neighborhoods, but in it bring beauty. And what is the beauty we bring? That the Lord is already at work and He's inviting us to be a part of it. And what do we play? We play a melody, an age-old melody of faith, hope, and love. And our job is to play that melody well. Our job is to bring that cello to the community and not just bring ourselves, but bring a whole army of people standing and playing together. So that melody that says it does not have to be this way plays out. In the midst of brokenness, beauty and melody rings out. We're going to finish by saying an age-old prayer. It's a prayer that we say at World Vision every chapel service on a Wednesday. I think, Hannah, you're going to find it's about 2 more slides away. Here we go. If you can read it on the screen, would you stand with me? And together we'll say this prayer, which really speaks so much of what our mission is today. May God bless you with discomfort at easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships, so that you'll live deep within your heart. May God bless you with anger at injustice, oppression, and the exploitation of people and our planet, so that you'll work for justice, equity, and peace. May God bless you with tears to shed for those who suffer, so you'll reach out your hands to comfort them and change their pain into joy. And may God bless you with the foolishness to think that you can make a difference in this world, so you'll do the things which others say cannot be done. Amen.